Hey, entrepreneurs, here's one of the things that my clients usually try to skip past when we first start working on productivity coaching. As you know, I focus on the decision aspect of productivity coaching because ultimately all productivity comes down to decisions. It's the decisions that you make about where to focus first, even for which habits to improve so that you can increase your own peak performance. It's the decision about which of the many opportunities you have in front of you to pursue first, second, third, in what order, all at the same time. It's the decision about what kind of time horizon to use. Short runway, focus on immediate success and use that success to snowball and roll into success later? Or do you take a longer time horizon and say, if we just build these systems and processes, ultimately the success our business will achieve will be much higher in the long run? There's all of these decisions that you're making every day: who to fire, where to put your time just today, let alone which system to use to decide how to manage your to-do list or how to prioritize your week or your month. There's all of these decisions that you're making. And so that's why the very first part of productivity is not how do you work. It's not how do we increase the amount of focus that you're bringing to the work, but rather it's how you think. That's the first step. That's the first level of productivity. And then becomes how do you feel? That's the second layer of productivity. How do you think? How do you feel? What is that dominant emotional state you show up with at work each day? If you master those two states first, it becomes a lot easier to then master the third part, which is how you work. What you do is less important than how you think and how you feel when it comes to productivity, because thinking is that first step. It's the slowing down to speed up concept. It's replacing brute force effort with elegant strategy. When you slow down to think, you're far more likely to notice those elegant strategies. So that's why we have to start with how you think. So here's the challenge this week. I want you to consider one way that the way you think is impacting your productivity. And this is one of the principles I come back to over and over again in these weekly mini challenges, because it's so crucial, so important, and so easy to overlook, because it feels abstract, ethereal. It doesn't feel as practical as some of the other things that people want to focus on when they start working on accelerating their goals. It's this simple concept that you have to be very clear about what business you're in. When railway companies were among the most powerful companies in the world in terms of influence and wealth and even just strategic momentum that they had, they failed to define the nature of the business they were in, and therefore they were replaced by car companies. If they had, instead of thinking that they were in the train and the railway business, and so then they took this defensive stance where they tried to shut down trolleys and manufacturing of vehicles by blocking in various different ways. If they had instead realized that they were actually in the transportation business, they could have been at the forefront. They could have been the leaders in the auto industry. But instead, they diminished in their power over time, shrank until they became businesses that were barely even profitable for a long period of time. They've since had a comeback, but at a great cost. And so this first thinking exercise is to ask yourself, the business that we do, what business are we actually in? What is the end result that people care about that they pay us for? That allows you to see the system more clearly. That allows you to get curious about the process that brings about that end result. If you get really curious and focused on the process that gets that end result, the thing that your customer client actually cares about, you start to enjoy the process of trying to discover how to do that better. You feel less beat up by the small setbacks that come in the process of that discovery, because you become fascinated with the game of succeeding in the business you're truly in. Now, we can take that one step back with whatever productive outcome that you're focused on. Let's say that you've recognized the bottleneck. There's a constraint in your business, and if you could just overcome it, you could produce a lot more value. And so you start thinking about hiring for that position. You start thinking about outsourcing. You start wondering which consultants you could bring in who could show you the templates and the processes to overcome maybe a lack of knowledge of how you could overcome that constraint. You start thinking of all these strategies. This is where I want you to use that same mentality of what business are we actually in, which is applying that broad principle to your entire business. But what if we take that and we apply it to this particular constraint? What is the nature of that constraint? Get very specific about, this is the actual output that matters. Instead of just seeing the process and thinking we have to improve our process, ask yourself the question. It requires you to zoom out a little bit and say, yeah, but if we forget about the process and we're just thinking about the outcome, the output that actually matters for this piece of our system, what is it? Get really clear, get a very good definition. Don't make that same mistake of thinking, that you're in the job of improving that process, when in reality, you're in the job of producing the outcome that the process yields. That's one aspect of thinking that leads to better productivity, because you spend less time rushing around doing things that aren't really the crucial core ingredient, the essential ingredients that make all the difference. Your challenge this week is to ask yourself, where have I not done as good of a job as I could at examining that question? What business are we actually in? What output or outcome really matters in some of the places where you're feeling stuck? Talk to you again next week.